rhyme scheme? It's a very common question, and I'm going to say a few things here to guide you on what is expected. Rhyme is brought, especially when there is a short poem, like it was the case in last year's KCSE paper. Rhyme scheme was brought in last year's KCSE paper. Question 3A was a short poem, and from that poem, the first question was describe the rhyme scheme. So here you'll have a question of describing the scheme, and I am persuaded that by now our teachers have taught us how to do the description of the rhyme scheme, where we use small letters of the alphabet. Small letters. For example, you could have a rhyme scheme like this: A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D. Assuming that is a stanza, you present your answer like this, and you will not score for this. When you do the scheme, this is the scheme. The next thing you do is to state the type. What type of rhyme scheme is this? And from this arrangement, you can see it is a regular rhyme scheme. Regular rhyme scheme. You state the type, and the third thing for you to score, you say why. This is the part I want to emphasize, because I've seen many of us can do the description. They are able to state the type because it is obvious from the letters. You can always tell the type, but the reason is the one that we fail to give. And the reason is always, if it is regular, you say you can predict. That is important. So under rhyme scheme, so that we will not have any problems moving forward, remember to do the scheming using the small letters. Remember to state the type and give the reason. Why is it regular? It is regular because you can predict. For example, if we were to predict the scheme of the next stanza, we will have E, F, E, F, G, H, G, H. That is where prediction is coming in. And you can also proceed doing the prediction up to the end. My own analysis shows that KCSE brings regular rhyme schemes. If you have the past papers, you can do an analysis of yourself and you can confirm that. Regular rhyme scheme. Another thing, if a poem has more than one stanza, if this was stanza 1, this was stanza 2, we separate the schemes between stanzas using a comma. When this comma is here, it signifies this is the end of the stanza, and if we had another one, we would put a comma there and we proceed like that. Something else about rhyme scheme, which is very common, sometimes students are told to state rhyming once. Sometimes they say pairs. Two ones would rhyme if they have the same sound. And the answer we give sometimes is very interesting. For example, students have found this one and this one because they are homophones. They are rhyming, and it is true, they are rhyming. But when we present our answer like this, we do not score. Despite the fact that these two are rhyming pairs, that will not score because there is remember we talked of the requirements of the answers and the questions. A rhyming pair is given using a conjunction. You write this and you write and this. We look out for this when we are marking. How have you presented your rhyming once? Remember we said at the beginning, this is a guiding lesson. I am guiding you so that you don't miss marks out of carelessness. So in some cases, you find students have written the answers like this. And I agree. You can see there is evidence that they have been taught. Teaching has happened there. But you see, the kind of teaching has resulted into carelessness. An answer like this is not going to score. So please note that. Even if you don't get anything else in this lesson, do not miss this mark of carelessness. The last thing I want to say about rhyme and rhyme scheme is that a word does not rhyme with itself. A word does not rhyme with itself. I am going to give an example. If, for example, this was the last word in line 1, then in line 2, the same word was repeated. In line 3, we have this word, and in line 4, we had this word, like that. I want to make it a bit challenging here. We had this, and you see, students come up with this rhyme scheme. Here they write A, here they write A, here they write B, here they write B. And they present it like this: A, B, B. What type? They say it is irregular. Why? Because you can predict. A word does not rhyme with itself. A word does not rhyme with itself. So this scheme is going to be, the correct scheme would be A, B, C, D. These two ones are the same. These two are the same. But in rhyming, a word does not rhyme with itself, and therefore you end up with a rhyme scheme of that nature, as opposed to rhyming this with this and rhyming this with this. The last thing about rhyme, and this is a very common question. I hope I'm not too fast. This is just guidance. The last thing about the scheme is when we asked the effects or the functions. Why would a poet use a rhyme scheme in their poem? What does it achieve? What function does it achieve? And these ones are very obvious. I'm sure most of us know them. Rhyme scheme achieves memorability. When a poem or a song has rhyme scheme, it is easier to remember that song. Even the songs that we know, we remember them because of the rhyme scheme. The other effect is recitability. Then number 4 is rhythm. There is also a fourth one, which is escaping my attention. But while we are here, there is a confusion students make. There is a question on what achieves rhythm. This one is a different question from the effect of rhyme. And the answers for rhythm are different. Rhythm is achieved by alliteration, assonance, and the other sound patterns. But effect of or functions of rhyme, memorability, we are able to remember. It is then there is recitability, rhythm, and one more. I will remember it in the course of the lesson and remind you. So that is what I can say about rhyme and rhyme scheme. Rhyming ones should be shown using the conjunction, and also you should remember the functions and the effect of rhyme in a poem. We can go to the KCSE question paper for last year, and you'll see those things that I have talked about. We can move on to another thing. The next slide is about questions on the short poem. questions on the short poem. I'm going to be a bit faster now because we have a lot to cover. Remember, we said the oral skills is a jackpot question. It carries a lot of marks. The short poem, apart from testing the rhyme and the rhyme scheme, also brings the following other questions. There is the question on how would you perform? How would you perform line 2? And I want us to be very keen here because the same can be asked from a song, from an oral narrative, and the other questions. So it is important to listen here. How would you perform? Performance question should be approached from 3 aspects. You can use intonation. Anytime you see a question asking you, how would you perform the line by the hair? How would you perform line 2 of stanza 3? Is a performance question. Performance, how would you perform it? So you can use intonation, bearing in mind that we have 5 types of intonation, and we have been taught occasions for each of the 5 types of intonation. So you can use that approach. The other approach is a stress. The other approach is stress. Stress in a line happens on content once. So whatever line you are given, you split and get all the content once. And then you talk of I would stress this one, this one, this one. Why? They are content ones. Content ones help in conveying the meaning, and that is why we stress them. The last approach is what we call non-verbal. Non-verbal means you are not using intonation, you are not using stress, you are using facial expressions, you are using gestures, and the other forms of non-verbals. For example, last year's short poem and this line. Last year's poem and this line, I knew he was, and it had an exclamation mark. Last year's KCSE paper and this line, and the student were asked, how would you perform this line? I knew he was wrong. And the line ended was punctuated with an exclamation mark. From the intonation approach, if you wanted to score, from the intonation aspect, you can say, I would say it with a rising, falling intonation. I would say it with a rising, falling intonation because it is an exclamative. I would say it with a falling, rising intonation. Why? Because it is an exclamation. You score. You score full marks. You could also use the approach of stress. And here, you would split. This becomes a pronoun. This becomes a verb. This becomes another pronoun. This becomes an auxiliary verb. And this becomes an adjective or adverb, like that. From our lesson of stress in sentences, you know that we stress nouns, verbs, adjectives, and adverbs. There are 8 parts of speech. So these 4 fall under content ones. They function to make sentences, they function to convey meanings in sentences. The other part of speech, the other ones that form the part of speech, like the prepositions, pronouns, conjunctions, and determiners, function to make sentences grammatical. Therefore, they are not stressed. Functional ones are prepositions, pronouns, conjunctions, and determiners. Their function in sentences is to make them grammatical. They do not carry meanings. Meaning is carried by nouns, verbs, adverbs, and adjectives. Never, in short. So from there, you can proceed to answer the question and say, I would stress new and wrong, because they are noun. The new is a verb, and wrong is I knew it was wrong. You would emphasize that. When you use the non-verbal, you can say, I would say the statement with an angry face, punching the air for emphasis. I would say the statement with an angry face because you are confirming your suspicion of that person who was wrong, and you put it that way. So performance does not miss, even if it is an oral narrative where we have a character speaking and they are dramatized. The examiner could ask you to, how would you say the line that was said by the hare or any other animal? And performance question should take any of this. You cannot use the three of them in an exam, so you choose what works for you. If you find intonation easier, use it. If you find stress easier, use it. If you find nonverbal, use it. For me, I advocate for stress. It is very easy as long as you know the part of speech, they come out. Sometimes a sentence like this is also brought, and you are asked, which word? Which word? Notice, which word would you stress in this line? When they ask you singular word, we always stress the last content word in a sentence. We stress the last content word in a sentence. But if the question asks, remember we say this is guidance. If the question asks for ones, plural, you'll talk about all of them, which fall under nouns, verbs, adjectives, and adverbs. Those are small things in exams that make us fail. We can move on to another aspect. There is still on the same question. This question, we say it requires, it's a personal involvement question. How would I know that the audience is listening? How would I perform? How would I sustain? How would I capture the attention of the audience? It is a personal involvement question. And this is my guidance. Candidates, if you are listening, this is my guidance. Such questions must be personalized. The answers must be personalized. For example, you say, I would, because the question was asking you. So you keep saying, you begin all your answers like this. I would use an angry face. I would use a rising, falling intonation. This is a part of personalizing that I am talking about. Don't just give statements that are not involving you. How would you know that the audience is listening? How would you capture the attention of the audience? I would clap my hands. I would maintain a purposeful eye contact. I would use dramatic pause, blah, 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 etc., etc. So when we are answering that question of how would I or how would you, remember to introduce your answers with personal statements. We move on to the next. The other area that is tested in the oral skills is the oral literature's short forms. The oral literature short forms. The oral literature short forms. And I want to show you how this one happens. The short forms here include tongue twisters, proverbs, riddles. What have I left out? We have the oral poetry. This is not the one that comes in paper 2, the oral poetry, songs. Then here we have jokes, and then we have puns. This is how the testing is done. This is how the testing is done. You'll always be asked to identify with a justification. Identify with a justification. For example, KCSE 2017, there was a riddle. KCSE 2017, there was a proverb. KCSE 2017, there was a tongue twister. And the question was, identify each of the following genres. When you identify a tongue twister, so the questions are revolve about identification with justification. Why is it a tongue twister? When you are doing justification, you are giving out the features, characteristics. The features of a tongue twister. Similarly, when you identify a proverb, you give a reason why you think it is a proverb. Riddles, the same. The oral poetry, we have features of oral poetry and features of songs. Joke and also puns. Another thing that you need to be aware about the short forms, and by the way, KCSE 2023 is likely going to test the short forms, because the last 2 years, 2022 and 2021, they brought a short poem, the schemes and the whatever. In 2019 and 2017, they brought the oral songs. So I will not be surprised if we encountered the short forms in this year's KCSE. So if you are at home and you are listening, when you go back to school, find some time and go through the proverbs, identification of proverbs, the types of proverbs, the features, and the stylistic device prevalent. This is another common question. Stylistic device prevalent in riddles. Riddles will tend to use alliteration and tongue twisters, similes, metaphors. So what is the commonest device that is found in each of the short forms of poetry? So that is my guidance on the short forms. We could also have questions on the other forms of oral literature, like the oral narratives. the oral narratives. These ones are 6. We have 6 types of oral narratives. I'm sure we've done the legends, the myths, the tongue twisters, the dilemma, the etiological narratives, and the monster narratives. The first question will always be, identify the type of an oral narrative that one is. They will have brought you one. You read it through, and you'll be able to see the features in that oral narrative, and you can use your knowledge of features of each of the 6 oral narratives to place your classification. Is it a dilemma? Why so? Is it an etiological narrative? Why so? That is the next slide. That is where we are covering the oral narratives. I have said that we need to know the features of each of them. There are some that have similarities. You could be asked the similarities between myths and legends, because there is a way they relate. One time there was that question in KCSE. Then we have got 2 things here which are sometimes the students find confusing. Functions of oral narratives. These functions are for all the 6 of them. And then sometimes you ask the functions of a specific narrative. So let us be careful and keen when we are reading the questions. When we asked about the functions of the oral narratives, you list the functions, the role they play, the 6 of them combined. But if it is a specific question on functions of dilemma narratives, the functions of dilemma narratives could be very different from a trickster narrative. It is the same thing with the songs. I had a very interesting experience with this question. The student who brought a work song, a work song, and the student had identified that correctly and said it is a work song that is sung by people who are performing a difficult task, a heavy task, to make it light. But when the next question asks the student to give the function of the song above, the student said it is for entertainment. It is for entertainment. That student has given functions of songs instead of the functions of a work song. When you are working, there is no entertainment there. So when you say it is for entertainment, for fun, and you are lifting heavy loads, that confirms that there is cramming happening in schools. When you cram answers, you'll have the correct answers for the wrong questions. That is the danger of cramming. You can't have entertainment in a work song. Nobody enjoys to fun. Nobody drives fun from that kind of a situation. So let us be keen on that. Still on oral narratives, we are here. Still on oral narratives, there are a few guidance I need to give you. Oral narratives. You will not miss this question on identification of stock phrases. Let me say something about the stock phrases. The stock phrases are the opening and the closing formulas. The opening and the opening and the closing formula. When the question asks you to identify a stock phrase, you have freedom to identify either the opening or the closing. Stock phrase means the opening and the closing formula combined. The next question will ask you about the functions of the opening formula and the closing formula. So the first one was to identify where you pick it from the narrative in the exam, and the next is to state the role or the function. Then another common question, some years back, students were asked to state who a stock character is. Stock character, stock phrases and stock character. A stock character is a name of a character that is common in narratives of a given community. A stock character is a name of a character who is common, or that is common in the narrative of a given community. For example, in the Kikuyu community, this name, Karia, is very common. Almost every Kikuyu community narrative, almost every narrative from Kikuyu community you read or you come across, you find it as Karia. And in the year 2021, in KCSE, I think Karia was there. Therefore, Karia is a stock character. It is easier to, almost everybody, all the narrators find it easier to use Karia as a character. And I think in our country, we have a stock character called Wanjiku. Wanjiku is a stock character in matters constitution and politics. You hear people talking of Wanjiku, and Wanjiku is a stock character, and Wanjiku embodies or represents all of us like that. We can move on to other common questions in the oral narratives. Why animal characters are used in oral narratives? Why animal characters are used in oral narratives is a very common question. I am sure we've been taught that by our teachers. It is a matter of revising and reminding ourselves. There is also a common question, not very common, but I think it may have been ignored. Why smaller animals emerge victorious in oral narratives? Why smaller animals? The trickster narratives I talked about use animal characters. All the trickster narratives you have heard have animal characters. And if you've been very keen, you'll have noticed one character is smaller and the other one is bigger. The elephant and the hare. Elephant being the bigger one, the hare being the smaller one. But in all the narratives you have heard and read, the smaller animal character emerges victorious. Why? So that is a common question. Remember, I said I'm not teaching. I am just guiding you on that. Still on oral narratives, we are moving to the next slide. I want to emphasize something here. Sometimes you are told to identify a social activity of the community in the narrative. The other question that relates to this is identify an economic activity of the people in the narrative. And the last one is identify the political activity of the people in the narrative. Sometimes the examiner is a bit cunning and asks you to identify a socio-economic activity. Socio-economic activity. Socio is way of life. Economic is livelihood. How do the people in that community earn? Are they farmers? Political is how they were governed. Please note the difference. We have had cases where students are asked for social activity and they give a political. They say there is a chieftain because they have mentioned a senior chief in the narrative. Social activity is the way of life. Like if you say the marriage is a social activity. Another way of looking at social activity, how did the people come together? What brought people together? Funerals, burials, weddings, initiations, they fall under social activities. Activities that bring people together socially count for social activities. And here you name, you use a noun to name, and then illustrate. You name a social activity like marriage, and then you illustrate how did the marriage happen? How was it done? How have you, what is the evidence of marriage in the narrative? Similarly, for the economic activity, and the first two will not miss from a narrative. At least the first two, they will not miss. Livelihood means, what were they doing to earn a living? You identify again what they were doing, noun. You say farming. Please look at this. Farming is a noun and not the farmer. Some people say farmers like that. This is the activity they are doing. Remember, we are talking of an activity. Activities will have ing. Like now I am teaching. So the activity I'm doing is teaching, not the teacher. So there is a farming. Then you give evidence of that farming from the story. And lastly, political. You can also be asked about socio-political, socio-economic, like that. Political is how they were ruled, how they were governed. And most of the narratives will talk of there was a chief. If you see a chief, it means they are under an authority in the form of a chief. They also talk of elders, and they are under council of elders, such kind of things, and you always give an illustration. Most important there is you name the activity using a noun, and then you give an illustration, which is evidence from the narrative. We also have stylistic devices used in the narrative, features of style which are employed in the narrative. That's a common question you identify. We also have there are some narratives that are brought, and in between they have a song, and the examiner now uses that opportunity to ask you to state the functions of that song in that narrative. Then there is this often ignored question. In narratives, we have what we call target audience. I said there are 6, starting from legends, myths, trickster narratives, etiological narratives, dilemmas, monsters. A monster narrative, for example, let me use that. A monster narrative would have children as the target audience. Why children? Because monsters have a warning aspect in them. For example, children who are warned not to walk at night or to use a certain path, a shortcut, because they were likely going to encounter monsters. So you can talk of children. You can also talk of teenagers. Especially the girls are warned, if they are walking lonely, they might encounter monsters, beasts, and there could be that danger. So each of the narratives there has a target audience. Another one is a dilemma. Dilemmas are stories that present us with difficult choices, none of which is easy to make. And the target audience for dilemma narratives are the leaders. Our leaders find themselves at a crossroad every day. They find themselves at a quagmire every day because they are hard decisions to make. So they can be told such kind of stories. And also the youths. Our youths are in this situation every day. Sometimes they don't know whether to take drugs because it is cool. They don't know whether to follow their peers, and they find themselves in this kind of a situation. Therefore, if you have an audience of youths and you narrate to them a dilemma, because it ends up evoking emotions and also triggering debates, you find it is a very appropriate. You find that youths are the appropriate audience for this, and all the others, just in case the examiner decides to ask. Etiological narratives are very appropriate for youngsters, for the children who are in school, because mostly they deal with the question why, and then they would find that appropriate. Moving on to the next slide, still on oral narratives. How would you perform? I think I have talked about that. How would you prepare to tell a narrative? Qualities of a good storyteller. You have done that in Form 1. What would you do to involve the audience? And I said these are personal involvement questions. What would you do? I would, blah, blah, blah. How would the audience react before, during, and after the narrative? Key ones: before, during, and after. We can move on to the next slide on the oral skills tested. Oral skills tested. The one with listening skills, speaking skills. As we wait for that to be projected, there is very good. There it is. I hope you can see that page. If you have a phone, you can take a photo of that. These ones I will not talk about them, but I want to bring them to your attention. There are quite a number of them: the listening skills, the speaking skills, the study skills, the negotiation skills, the reading, all the way up to the etiquette. Those skills are distributed across Form 1 all the way to Form 4. You need to revisit them. The oral report, which was tested in the year 2018, all those you need to look at them. Moving on to the next area, which is also very common. This one does not miss. The one on stress. The next slide. I think this could be our last because of time. This could be our last. We will be covering this as the last one. Let me write it here. Stress. And we have 4 types of stress that we test. We have stress in ones. We call that one also lexical stress. And majorly, what I have seen most students have done, you have looked at the stress in bisyllabic bisyllabic ones. Bisyllabic ones are ones with the 2 syllables. And while you're there, you majored on verbs and nouns. Everybody has done that. All the students are aware of that. There was a surprise last year in KCSE, and this question came. They brought 3 ones. They brought the word invalid. They brought the word contrast. And they brought the word organize. I have no problem with the first 2 because we can easily manage that. But if you look at organize, it is a 3-syllable verb. It's a trisyllabic verb. Trisyllabic verb. Remember, I have said students have dealt, almost everybody is aware about bisyllabic verbs and nouns and the syllable that carries the stress. But NEC decides to surprise everybody and brings a trisyllabic verb. And you can imagine students were transferring the knowledge of this to this. That is the danger of cramming, and I talked about it. So let us be keen, let us go an extra mile and not just dwell on bisyllabic. The other year, they also tested affixes affecting stress. By affixes, I mean prefixes and suffixes. When a prefix is added to a root word, some of those prefixes, and we don't have time, I would have gone into details. There are some prefixes that do not at all affect. It is the next slide. Maybe we can wind up with that. There are some affixes that do not affect the placement of the stress, where the others that are affect blah 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 blah. So we need to go through that part in our schools, so that when I do not see a situation where the examiner will keep asking about bisyllabic verbs and nouns, because there are other areas of stress that needs to be covered. The other type of stress is a stress in phrases. The stressing of the phrases is different from the stressing in ones. And then there is stress in sentences. I think I talked about it when I was talking of the approaches of answering the performance question. In sentences, stress happens on content ones, which are nouns, verbs, adjectives, and the last one, as I wind up, is emphatic stress. It was tested in the year 2016. That is a long time. I think it can also be tested in 2023. Thank you very much for, I don't know whether there are questions. Okay. I am told there are no questions. So I think we will be coming to an end. Once again, I'm very grateful for this opportunity. If you found time to listen to us, we are also glad that you are with us. Asanteni sana. Thank you.